Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Happy full moon, everybody. So, coming up on Sunday, we're going to have a day long. And as always, we decide in advance a theme based on something that's been interesting uh, in our practice lately, in our discussions. And this month, what came up was sloth and torpor, one of the five hindrances. And leading into that, we'll be kind of focusing in on this particular mental pattern. But as I was going through the recordings and essays and such that's on the website and on the YouTube repository, I didn't find anything on the hindrances that I could just easily link back to and say, oh yeah, yeah, go listen to this particular talk, which says to me that because I agree with you, I think we've been talking about it like every single month, but yeah, it's probably been a little while since we did a kind of run through of what the hindrances are. And for me personally, if I were in your seat, sitting down to listen, and the teacher said, "And now I'm going to talk about the five hindrances," I would already start to go to sleep, and it would totally defeat the point of the exercise because it'd be like, "I know the five hindrances. Okay, come on, I don't have to listen to this. This is remedial, basic Buddhism." And I think to some degree, yeah, this is what we're dealing with. Many of us come in through the channel of meditation. And meditation is a focused activity, which means it is a goal oriented activity. You're going to sit and you're going to pay attention to the breath. And if you can't even get that far, then you have to deal with what gets in the way. And hindrance is in the Pali nivarana, literally means obstacle, like what stands in your way from doing a particular task. So, because many of us come into Buddhism not because it's what our parents did or it's what our culture does, it's a great neighborhood meeting place. We really like the chanting, the candles, the incense. We usually come in because we're trying to get something. Because of that goal orientation, the hindrances make a lot of sense. Yeah, we want to learn how to meditate. We can't figure out what keeps stopping us. So the teacher tells us about the five hindrances. There are these five obstacles that are getting in your way of meditation. So many of us start with the five hindrances, and it's later we learn about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and taking Sila. Usually we learn about the hindrances before we learn about Sila. Before we learn don't kill, we're told, let go of, clinging and attachments and ill will and, laziness and restlessness, and which is interesting. But it also means this can seem too basic. And I think that's the first thing we want to shake up in order to talk about it. So I don't fall asleep, so you don't fall asleep. So we actually think about the hindrances a little bit, especially going into the day long, if you'll be there on Sunday. Is that these are not remedial things, these are not basic things. And in fact, the list of the five hindrances is really kind of strange in the Buddha's teaching. Like if you survey a lot of the Buddha's teaching, the, even the words themselves, they don't necessarily match the other concepts that the Buddha was talking about. This is a very really focused list of five things. And I just think that's interesting. It's just taking a step back rather than saying it's like, oh, this is really basic, saying like, this is really advanced. This is really weird. This is really general in a way, but also really specific in another way. And so what do I mean? Well, if we look at the Buddhist teaching, we have things like greed, hatred, delusion. Yeah, we have ignorance, craving, becoming, these kind of concepts. But then we have the five hindrances, and we have uh, kama raga, sensuality and lust. We have ill will, vyapada, which is really like illness directed towards another. We have tinamida, which is kind of stiffness and drowsiness. We have udacha kukucha, which is restlessness and remorse. And we have wichikicha, which is skepticism and doubt. Now, what's different about these five things, the five hindrances, is that all those other concepts were one word. They were one concept. They were one concrete thing. But these five hindrances are two things crammed together. So there's something different about them. And what really strikes me about what's different is that these are surface level thoughts. Yeah, because this is the only place in the mind where we see things doubled. When the Buddha talks about the first jhana, he talks about the jhana that still involves thinking. It has vitaka and vichara. It has our mind is still dualistic. It does something, it lets go. It does something, it lets go. It breathes in, it breathes out. And the hindrances are in this category. The hindrances can only exist at the surface level of the mind. So they are not the more basic parts of our personality, like ignorance or craving or becoming. They're not they're not like laziness. Laziness is one thing. Sloth and torpor is not laziness. They are actually two different things. So the hindrances deal specifically with a movement of the mind, an activity of the mind, a surface level pattern of thoughts. And that's kind of interesting in and of itself, because that means that the hindrances are not always there. They'll fall away at some point. Where if we have a tendency towards laziness and not really doing stuff, this is more drawn out. Yeah, it's more of a persistent kind of pattern or mood that we can be in over time. But when we look for a hindrance like sloth and torpor, it's either there or it's not. And how we can discover if it's there or not is what is our mind doing. Yeah, to see the hindrances, we have to listen to our thoughts. We have to watch what is the motion of the mind, what is the activity of the mind. Yeah. And that's why we get this kind of doubling pattern in all five of the five hindrances, is because it's not one clear thing, but it's kind of like a category of all of these kinds of thoughts. And in order to get skillful with recognizing the hindrances, we have to recognize them doing what they do best, which is getting in our way. This is their function. This is what they do. This is the essence of a hindrance. Yeah. So, as an example, I see you're all sitting somewhere. So, what if I were to say, okay, get up, go to the other side of the room, sit down, and start paying attention to your breath? Um, could you do that? And many of you are like, yeah, I could do it, but I'm not gonna. Right? But say it was an important part of the exercise, and say there was enough rapport established between us that I could actually somehow convince you to do it. We would be able to look at the five hindrances as they were arising. So maybe you would just get up, you'd go to the other side of the room, you'd sit down, and you'd start paying attention to your breath, and you would be what we call in technical parlance a trained human being. That is, you are somebody who has a certain level of mastery over your mind, that you can work through all of the steps to do this activity. But most of us, and most people, and especially most people who have not in any way practiced with training the mind, would get derailed. they would get up and they would look over and they'd be like, I can't sit over there. There's no chair. Or they would say, well, there's a chair, but it's covered in cat hair. Or they would say, oh, it's too cold to sit over there. Or they'd say, oh, it's too hot to sit over there. Or say it's too dark or it's too bright. They would say, I can't sit. We just did the meditation. Stop doing the meditation. Start doing the Dhamma talking. Or you would say, like, why? Why sit over there? Why not sit here? All of those five things that I just described, those were the five hindrances. Basically, you had a task, a simple task, whether externally motivated or internally motivated, whether somebody told you to do it or you decided to do it, and something got in the way. It wasn't a wall, it wasn't a snarling beast, it was your own mind. Yeah. And this is what we look for when we talk about the hindrances. The only possible thing that could stop you right now from going to the other side of the room and sitting down and meditating on the breath is you and your own mental processes. And this is what we work with in meditation, because meditation is the difference between we all get together and we do some chanting or we listen to a Dhamma talk or read a sutta versus you have to do this focused activity of meditating on the breath, and it's just you. And that's where, if you've got a mental pattern that is standing in the way of that, you're the one who works through it, which means you need the tools, which means you need to know about the obstacles. Yeah. This is something that's kind of funny. It's more funny when we see others doing it than when we have to work with it on the meditation cushion. Yeah. It's way funnier when we say, oh yeah, go over and do that. And somebody goes to do it and something, they're like, I can't do that. And you're like, oh, that's, it's good. The five hindrances. Yes. Yeah, you can't do it. And nobody's going to thank you for pointing it out either. This is the other part of mental training, is often in order to complete the task, there has to be this motivation to kind of work through these hindrances, to see them as hindrances. It's an obstacle. Hey, I want to do that thing, but these thoughts are getting in the way. Now, if it were as simple as just the goal orientation of the mind, there's times when we don't always have goals, that the hindrances wouldn't be as important as they are. But they really rise to importance when we see what they condition. And this is something that is kind of tucked away in the suttas, because again, the five hindrances are often taught to meditators. It's not basic instruction. It's meant to be more advanced. Is that it's only in a certain few places where the Buddha talks about how ignorance, this overarching mental pattern of not seeing things as they really are, and what conditions that. Often we think about it the other way around. What does ignorance condition? Well, ignorance conditions the sense bases, it conditions consciousness, it conditions craving and attachment and becoming. Yeah, it conditions suffering. But what conditions ignorance? And this is this really surprising revelation, is that the five hindrances are what condition ignorance. So whereas ignorance is one of these single things, yeah, these singular concepts that feeds and conditions all of the problems that we encounter in our mind, in our body, in our heart, in our life, the hindrances, which are this surface level thought, they are the thing that make ignorance possible. Yeah. And so we look at the motion of the mind and the way that we kind of get derailed to start to understand how it is we could possibly not see things as they really are. How is it we could crave something that is harmful to us? How is it that we could be attached in such a way that it makes us miserable? Well, the answer is if we sat down and looked at it long enough, of course we would let go. Of course we would relax. Of course we would stop doing that thing that's making us suffering. But we don't sit down long enough and skillfully enough to attend to that in order to see things as they really are. Then we ask the question, like, well, why don't we sit down and see things as they really are? And the answer is we stay in motion. And this is the five hindrances. They are these sort of derailing motions of the mind, the derailing thoughts of the mind that keep us not looking, that keep us not attending to things, that keep us not seeing things as they really are. So rather than like personality traits, they are more, yeah, they're more activities, we could say. And when we start to see them as harmful activities, activities that condition the more pervasive moods of mind, then we can start to want to get past them, want to sort of break them down. So often we start our practice and we're told, don't have sense desire. But it's sort of putting the cart before the horse, right? It's like, well, sense desire is getting in the way of our meditation. But in order to really get rid of sense desire, we have to develop a kind of basis of understanding of renunciation and the joys of mindfulness, yeah, and how craving is the cause of suffering. So we're starting out by, well, how do I let go of sense desire? Yeah, if I kind of like the things that I'm attached to, yeah, that's why I desire them. It can be a bit tricky, but in easier terms, if we start thinking about a hindrance as a motion of the mind, well, then we're only going to look for those particular times when, say, for the example of sense desire, when we get derailed because of something we want. And we want to say that that is the problem. Yeah. Not like I've got to cleanse my mind of all like desires and underlying attachments to things, but I've just got to be able to catch my mind veering off to the left or right because it wants something. Or more specifically, our goal in mindfulness meditation is to be aware of what's here and now, the present moment. As such, we attend to things like the body or the breath, things that are here and now. If we find that we keep thinking about something that's in the past or the future, or something that it's just really entertaining to think about, we find that this motion of the mind is directing us away from the present moment. It's directing us away from the mindfulness that we're wanting to attend to. Yeah. And so we can look for that particular motion of mind. It's not so much that we have to answer the question of what is it I'm desiring or why is desire a problem, but if we can catch that surface level activity of the mind and say, aha, I looked away from my meditation object because I wanted that thing. That was the problem. Now we have a much more concrete and directed and simple thing to attend to. Yeah, just looking for this, something got in the way of me just paying attention to the breath. But the breath is not a very interesting object. So if we talk in terms of competition, the breath almost always loses in terms of like the most interesting object of the mind. Yeah. And it's not a case that we have to make the breath more interesting. Yeah. And this is where meditation can feel very forceful. Like I've got to focus. I've got to stay with the breath. Like I've got to shut out all other activities. When we find ourselves doing that, often we've missed the opportunity to just sort of relax into watching and listening to what the mind is doing and catching. It's a much simpler almost, I'd say it's subtle, but it's actually a very gross and simple aspect of the mind. Yeah. We say, okay, there's my meditation object and there's me here and I'm moving towards the meditation object. Oh, I took a detour. Oh, I took a detour. That's what we deal with. Whereas if we, I don't know, I see Jim, and I think of your of Satine, of your cat, and like if we were to put a cat on the floor and you have its food dish on the other side of the room, it's like you could just watch the cat and watch how it moves towards the food dish, and you could be able to laugh because the cats are sort of the five hindrances incarnate, and you could see it gets interested in this and it gets interested in that, and it's sort of, you're like, go towards the food dish, and it gets all, it has ill will and it's annoyed and it refuses to do the thing that you want it to do. Yeah. Or it just flops down and goes to sleep on its way to its activity. Yeah. If we step back and we look at the mind as like an observer, these things are, they're kind of obvious in a way, but when we're in the middle of it, it doesn't seem so obvious. Yeah. Unless we're able to maintain that mindfulness of what we were trying to do and catch when we stop moving in that direction, when we stop attending to the task that we've set in front of us. Yeah. So rather than sort of grinding through the list, this is sensuality, this is ill will, this is sloth and torpor. What I would is encourage in talking about the hindrances, since you're all very familiar with these. They say we go over these like every week, and you go listen to other Dhamma talks. It's all about the hindrances. Yeah. Um, Maybe as we go into the day long, this is you have a couple of days, and just this is a simple task. It's a simple training to look for, okay, I've got a thing that I want to do, and just watch all of the times that you veer off on your way to do that one thing, and start to ask the question, well, how did that happen? Why did that happen? Yeah. Or if you are doing meditation, what is it that is, where are the moments where you stop paying attention to something that's here and now, and then asking yourself why. And so rather than having the checklist of, okay, I've got to watch for this and this and this, first you look for the motion, first you look for the distraction, and then you can categorize it. It's like, oh, okay, well, I was I was repulsed by that one thought, or I was just sort of drifting off, or I was confused about, well, what is it we're doing again? And then you can kind of put it in the appropriate category. Okay, that was the hindrance of ill will. That was the hindrance of sloth and torpor. That was the hindrance of doubt. Yeah. And hopefully, if you do this for a little bit, you can also start to notice, because, it's not all like the Theravada Buddhism can be very like, here are all the problems. But it's nice to talk about when there aren't problems too. And the great thing about the list of the five hindrances is it's a list that becomes, as I say, it cancels itself out. Like when you get good at spotting the hindrances, you no longer have to spot the hindrances. Yeah. If you catch them, then you can remove them, you can deal with them, you can work through them. Often you kind of learn how to stay on task. Even a thought comes up and you're like, you're a hindrance. A thought comes up, you're a hindrance, and you stay on task, and then they stop coming up. Yeah. Your mind stops getting derailed, distracted, turned away from its activity. And once that stops, you no longer have to watch for them. Yeah. And you can, because you're already doing the thing that you're intending to do, you're working towards your goal, and you recognize that you're not moving away from working towards your goal. So you don't have to watch for that activity anymore. And because these are surface level activities in the mind, then you're really beginning the process of seeing things as they are, which is, yeah, it's everything else that we're doing in the Buddhist teaching. That's the greater part of establishing right view and right thought and right speech and action and livelihood and yada yada yada. Yeah, and that's when we can really begin to do that. And so, in some ways, it is to our advantage that we start out this way, because you can see when you go into a temple or a monastery or retreat center or a meditation group, you can see how people don't make it in the front door. You can see all the various ways that they have something else to do that night, or they're too tired, or they're too restless, or they don't understand why bother. And you'd be like, oh wow, the hindrances kept them from even getting in the front door. And having been introduced to this, we're starting out with all of the tools to get ourselves into the seat, to get ourselves into the place of meditation. Yeah, that's actually kind of fortunate, like in terms of being able to start from learning how to train the mind. Yeah, we're not so dependent on others. But now it's just the matter of getting skillful and knowledgeable about what that training entails, rather than um, putting the mastery of meditation, oh, I'm just doing this to get, where we see it as, I'm getting good at learning how to do what I want to do. I'm getting good at seeing things as they really are. I'm getting good at staying on topic. Well, that's a life skill. Yeah, this is a very overarching, like important skill to have. Yes, this can be a very valuable activity, even if we're not learning meditation, but so much more. Yeah, this is something that can extend into other parts of our life. So yeah, with just a few thoughts to take with you on this full moon night. Um, Hopefully get the gears turning in a constructive way about the hindrances. And then if you're around on Sunday, we can get to talk about one specific hindrance, which deals with our energy levels and how we can manage those, which is a great topic and feeds into a lot of other parts of our practice. Yeah. So with that, I offer these thoughts for your considerations.